In today's episode, we discuss one of the most infamous coasters of all time, and how it perished in a chorus of screams. Welcome to Airtime Traveler. How's it going, everybody? Welcome to the Roller Coaster History Podcast. You are listening to Airtime Traveler. My name is Nathan Grace, and I'm joined by my wife and lovely co-host.
That's me. I'm Haley Grace.
And thank you for tuning in to episode 25!
Yay!
That's a delayed reaction on your part.
Sorry.
You just looked at me like, 20. What's so special about 25?
No, I was like, is it really 25?
It is. It's episode 25.
It doesn't feel like it.
I know. Well, last week was episode 24, so this is episode...
Thank you. I appreciate that. Stinker.
I've got quite the story for episode 25.
Oh, you do.
I've been hanging on to this one because this...
Oh, you're keeping it in that back pocket of yours?
Today's story is a story that pretty much every coaster enthusiast knows because
so why are we doing it?
Because we are not just for the enthusiast, we are for the GP as well.
Me.
Right? Yes. This is just for you.
Yes.
It's not for anybody listening. This is just for you.
General public princess. We have been over this.
If this is your first time, you need a crown. But we're not a video podcast, though, so no one would see it.
It doesn't matter. Make me feel special.
Here, can we find a crown in here somewhere?
Oh, dear.
If this is your first time tuning into the podcast, I am a coaster enthusiast and have been for a long time, and Haley is a member of the GP, or the general public. So
the general public princess.
Yes, we take one roller coaster and we dive into the history of that roller coaster. And so I'm here to do the research and tell the stories, and Haley is here to make me more interesting and make sure I don't put you all to sleep. So,
is that what I'm here for?
Yes, and I say it every week, and every week you're like, is that what I'm here for?
Yeah, I mean, it's true. Sometimes I feel like I put people to sleep, so...
You act like you're surprised.
I am. I'm like, why? I want to hear one of your episodes without me in it.
What's that?
Just you.
Just me?
Yeah, see how boring it actually would be.
That would be terrible. Like, I have because I listen to a lot of podcasts, and I have a hard time with podcasts where it's just one person. So, like, I've done a few episodes of Coaster Conversations by myself, and, like, they're fine, but I don't know. I just feel like podcasts are more interesting when you have somebody to it feels more natural. I feel like if I was just doing this by myself, I'd be... I don't know. If it's YouTube, at least you're interacting with the camera. Here, I'm just interacting with a microphone, and I don't know. It's just not quite the same. So, anyway, I think it's better. That's why I asked you if you would be willing to do this podcast before we started it. Because if you weren't willing to do it, then I probably wouldn't have done it. So,
I think it's been fun.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun. So, let's see, what do we got to talk about? Be sure to go and follow us on social media. You can follow us on Instagram and Twitter. It's just at Airtime Traveler. And if you go and do that now, then you can follow along as we go throughout the episode. I'll post pictures that I'll be showing Haley throughout the episode. That way you can kind of see some of the things I'm showing her. Instagram, there's not as much there because I'm limited to 10 pictures. But Twitter, you'll be able to see pretty much everything that I show Haley. So be sure to go and check those out. And also, if you're on Spotify or wherever you may be listening, be sure to go and leave the podcast a 5-star review. We can even pause.
Not 4 stars, not 3 stars, 5 stars.
Well, be honest, I guess. But
6 stars.
Oh, I don't think that's possible.
It is.
But if you
believe it, it will happen.
Haley's gonna be a little punchy tonight. It's kind of late. But yeah, go and leave a 5-star review. You can go do it right now. Quick, we'll pause for a few seconds while you go and do that. it really helps people find the podcast, and I know a lot of you have already done that, so we appreciate that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to spend a lot of time on news or updates because we do have a lot to talk about.
I don't think there was a lot.
The only thing that really happened recently is King Ka at Six Flags Great Adventure had a cable snap this week. So that's exciting.
Why didn't you tell me this? I didn't know this.
It didn't hurt. Nobody got injured. Nothing.
I don't want to know this.
Well, it just means the coaster's going to be down for a while they get it repaired. So, Storm Runner had the same thing happen 4 years ago, I think. The year before we went for the first time, Storm Runner had that happen. It was down all year. So, it happens. That's part of the hydraulic coasters I think all of them have had this problem now. So, anyway. So
I just never want to be on a ride that, malfunctions. It's
the chances of that are so slim. I mean, if you think about the
even get stopped, and have to evacuate.
If you think about the hundreds of millions of coaster rides that are given every year,
that never happens,
and it only happens to maybe a couple hundred people a year that this happens to. Chances are quite slim.
Nope.
So
it's the worst nightmare. I never get on a coaster again. No thanks.
You'll be fine. You'll get back on a coaster, I promise.
Could you imagine though, sitting in the sun? I've seen people that they sat in there for an hour.
Yeah, that's not okay when that happens. And I didn't hear that I'm not exactly sure. I think what happened is they launched, but then the cable snapped during the launch, and so it actually just went up and then rolled back.
No. No.
What's wrong with that?
No, because it's not supposed to work that way.
It's designed so that if that happens, there's precautions in place that it's totally safe.
That would freak me out because it's not supposed to happen that way.
It's not supposed to happen, but it's completely safe. They design it because they know it does. Sometimes it just happens that the launch isn't strong enough and it rolls back. And it just comes back down, the cable reattaches, and it launches it back off at a little bit faster speed to get it up and over the hill. So even Powder Keg, that happens. Powder Keg, we talked about in our first episode, that track that is goes into a spike and is all burnt at the end. You know what I'm talking about?
Sure.
When you go up to the ride, there's this big spike of black track that's designed to look like it's been blown off at the end.
Yeah.
You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Okay. That is there in case the train rolls back during the launch. It'll just roll back through the launch and up into that, and then, it's designed to do that. So, launch coasters have that built into place in case that happens. And it does happen. In fact, when I went
it better not happen to me.
When I went
That's all I'm just saying.
When I went to Holiday World this past week, there's actually a sign in the station for Thunderbird that says, this ride may roll back during the launch.
See, I would feel more comfortable if there was a warning saying, hey, this may happen.
Well, this is your warning.
No! Continue. We're talking about what is this coaster?
We need to get into today's coaster because we got a lot to cover today.
Here, I'll just read this for you.
But no, that's my job. I've spent too much research on this for you to go. So we're going to be talking about roller coaster at Kings Island today. So
is that why you're wearing your Kings Island hat?
Well, I'm pretty much always do that.
True,
I pretty much always wear the park hat for whatever recording we're doing. So this is the third coaster we've done at Kings Island. We did the Racer and Mystic Timbers last season. So today we're going to be talking about Banshee at Kings Island. Now I think this was definitely for both of us, one of our favorites at Kings Island. And we'll talk about it, but it's
intense. Yeah.
It's very intense. It's a lot of fun.
It is fun.
It's, I don't know, coaster enthusiasts either love it or hate it. It's kind of an interesting, yeah. And do you know why they love it or hate it?
The restraints.
Yep, it's those dang vest restraints. So very polarizing, but. So, opened in 2014, $24 million, which is quite a lot for an inverted coaster. But it is B&M, I guess. 4,124 feet long, 167 feet tall, that's a big...
Yeah.
This is really tall for an inverted coaster. Not the tallest, though. Top speed of 68 miles per hour.
As your mom would say, why?
That's what my mom would say. Why?
Why?
She is not a coaster person. In the Coaster Bot rankings, it ranks at number 74 in the country. Not bad. It ranks below inverts such as Raptor at Cedar Point, Afterburn at Carowinds, and Alpengeist at Busch Gardens Williamsburg. It ranks above inverts such as Batman the Ride at Six Flags Great America, Great Bear at Hershey Park, and Talon at Dorney Park. At Kings Island in the Coaster Bot rankings, it ranks 4th. I think you and I both rank it 2nd, right? Behind Orion.
I thought so.
I think, yeah. So we definitely like this more than others. But at Kings Island, so this is the rankings. Mystic Timbers at number 1, Orion at 2, Diamondback at number 3, and then Banshee at 4. And then the Beast, the Bat, and Flight of Fear at 5, 6, and 7. So let's see. A review of the name. I think it's a really solid name. And they did a really good job theming the coaster to match with the name.
The theming of
they did a very good job with it. So
the queue's awesome. And
the queue is very fun. Like with the little cemetery and like the station is like very gothic.
Yeah.
It's just well done. And then like as the train goes over the crest the lift hill, there's like that scream that goes. When you're on the coaster, you can't hear it. It's like down by the station that they play that scream, so it's kind of gives that ambiance as you're sitting in line for it. And
I think it's cool.
We really didn't have to wait in line because we did Banshee during ERT when we were at Kings Island, so which was nice because I know the line for Banshee can get not too bad because the capacity is really good, but anyway, yeah, I think the name's really good. The logo is really good too. It's definitely one of those logos that like you can put it all over stuff at the park and it just looks really nice. So they have it on, t-shirts and signs throughout and like, it's you'll see people, it's a very marketable logo. It's very, very well done. A review of the paint scheme and the trains. Yeah. I really like the paint scheme. I'm partial to the color purple, so I really like the way
I like the shade of purple they used. It's not super bright. It's kind of muted.
Yeah, it is.
I feel like that kind of gives that gothic appearance to it. So.
Yeah, and then I think the blue supports really, really go well with it. And then the trains are... I mean, the trains, inverted trains don't have a lot of design to them per se, but anyway, the colors they picked for them look nice. Yeah. Here's the park's description of the ride. Banshee.
Oh my gosh.
Get ready to scream on the world's longest steel inverted roller coaster. Thrill seekers have something to scream about when they experience the world's longest steel inverted coaster. With 7 stomach-churning inversions, the 4,124-foot-long coaster ties another steel inverted roller coaster record. Themed to a wailing mythological messenger from the underworld with flowing white hair and gleaming eyes. Banshee features the following succession of breathtaking thrills. It goes on to talk about the whole... Don't you act surprised every time I do this.
It's so funny, and it's funny every time because it's just I don't know.
It goes on to talk about the whole ride.
Today was a different voice. It was very dark.
It's Banshee. It's very, very mystical and creepy. Oh, let's talk customer reviews. You ready for these?
Yes, I am.
Oh, this is the best. Here we go. 1 star. Wasn't allowed to select my seat when the wait was 10 minutes. She said the line was too long. They weren't even loading full trains. So then this person goes in and says update 4 years later. So they literally found their review 4 years later and updated it. 4 years later. Pretty much same story. It's like the worst crews in the park end up on this ride. No idea why. I mean, I do understand the frustration with that. I had a little bit of that when I tried to get in line for Lightning Rod at Dollywood, where it's like, you're just saying that to say that. Like, this is not going to cause you any inconvenience. And I have some thoughts on that between my Holiday World and my Kentucky Kingdom trips. So we'll talk about that when we do trip reports for those. But 1 star, was very disappointed that I did not die while on this ride. Given the constant reminder of death from the graves strewn throughout the ride, I was very much under the assumption my life would meet an end. Will not ride again.
What?
I have no idea. I get the impression that this is a meme. Like, he's just posting this to be funny. So.
Well, it was definitely giving me all kinds of confusion vibes. What the heck?
1 star, it was an hour-long wait for being so fast. Okay, the coaster speed does not impact the speed of the queue. I think we need to be clear on this.
That's like the dumbest review I've ever read.
I don't know if it meant it was an hour-long wait for being so fast, like they were dispatching really fast. So, but that's not how it's written, so...
People give me headaches.
Oh, good stuff.
It's like, why? Why would you put that? People need to have some common sense.
2 stars. This is the only coaster I have issues with. The only coaster.
Oh.
The only one.
Ever.
Only one ever. Sure, it's a great ride, but the restraint system tightens as the ride goes on and becomes painful to ride. If you don't have cushioning on your hips, look forward to possible soreness or bruises. It's so interesting because the vest restraints, I've now been on, let's see, because there's 2 at Cedar Point that have the vest restraints. There's the one at Kings Island, and then the 2 wing coasters I've been on. So I've been on 5 that have the vest restraints now, and none of them have bothered me at all. Like, I don't understand it, and maybe it's, I don't know, maybe I have to be taller. There was another review in here, I can't remember if I saved it or not, but someone said, if you're over 5'7", be prepared to be crushed by the vest restraints. And I'm like, I'm 5'10", and I feel totally fine. I don't know. Yeah. I don't know what it is that I love the vest restraints, and all the other enthusiasts hate them, but whatever, it is what it is. 3 stars. Good ride, but one time I hid my water bottle in a bush since they don't have free lockers. When I came back 20 minutes later, somebody had spit chewing tobacco in it, and I didn't realize until I took a swig. Oh my god.
This is a review for the
This is a review for the coaster. I gave a 3-star review for this because they hid their water bottle in a bush, and someone else. This is the most bizarre review we've ever read on the show. I can't make this up. My gosh.
I can't. My stomach hurts.
Wow. What a trip. Also, this person has 568 reviews. That's a lot.
Oh, sweetheart. You need to have the new hobby.
Whew. Okay. 3 stars. It felt like just as it was getting good, the ride ended. The speed was great, but content-wise felt a little let down. It's kind of interesting because it's a pretty long coaster, all things considering. Like, most coasters are less than a half mile of track, and this one's, closer to a mile of track than a half mile. So, I don't know, it's just kind of an interesting comment. 4 stars, great ride, but the seats smell really bad, like BO. Rode it 4 times and every seat smells gross. They need to replace the rubber area of the seat that surrounds your face. Otherwise, excellent ride, and when it's going fast, you can't smell it so much. What is going on at Banshee?
This is a very interesting comment.
These are so strange. Oh. And, of course, we had to close with this review, because there's always one of these.
Why? These are so ridiculous.
4 stars. I'm still too scared to ride this ride, but I know plenty of other people that love this ride.
Why would you review it?
And there you go.
Why? I just don't understand why you have the desire to...
We need to come up with a nickname for these people that need to leave a review for a ride they've never been on. There's got to be some. I'll have to brainstorm that in the
childless reviewers, because they have all the time in the world to do this.
There's our reviews from Banshee. That's our introduction to Banshee at Kings Island. Let's talk about the fascinating history of Banshee at Kings Island. So we're going to go back to 1990.
1990.
All right, 1990. We're not going back super far today. And yet, this is one of the longest scripts I've ever written because there's just so much to talk about. It's such a fascinating story.
How long is this episode going to take?
We'll make sure. Sometimes my scripts are super long just because I want to make sure I talk about everything, but sometimes I cut out, fluff that's in there. It's basically like I would prefer to make my scripts as long as possible so that way I make sure I have enough material. And then if I need to cut stuff out while we're talking, it's not that difficult. So,
all right, let's go.
I do want to give a quick shout out to Defunct Land and El Toro Ryan. They both had really awesome YouTube videos with a lot of information in them. I was pretty familiar with this story just because it's such a legendary story within the coaster enthusiast community. But there are little bits and details they had in their video that I had not heard before. So just wanted to give a shout out to them. If you want to go see even more, you can go and check out their videos on YouTube. So we've talked about the Coaster Wars before, right?
Yep.
And we talked about, specifically in the steel category, we talked about Magnum XL200 and Phantom's Revenge and yada yada. We've talked about all this. Well, the wooden coasters also were affected by the Coaster Wars. So in 1990, Six Flags Over Texas would open Texas Giant, which was the tallest wooden coaster in the world at the time at 143 feet.
Looks like fun.
It looks like fun, but I've also heard it was really rough. Like you can see, it's just there's parts of it that don't look profiled properly.
Oh, yeah.
It looks kind of anyway. It looks fun, but also looks kind of like I don't know. It's just kind of interesting. But that record would not last long because in 1991, Cedar Point would break that record by opening Mean Streak at 161 feet tall. And then in 1992, just a year later, Fiesta Texas would break the record again with Rattler, 179 feet tall. This one was built by the roller coaster. Oh gosh, I have it RCCA. I can't remember what that second C stands for. Oh, it's Roller Coaster Corporation of America is what RCCA stands for. So by this point, CCI and GCI kind of get enter the wooden coaster market with like a Wildcat at Hershey Park that we've talked about. So by that point, the wooden coasters people were kind of afraid to go bigger than the 179 foot of Rattler. It was kind of like, GCI and CCI are making really good wooden coasters that stay a lot closer to the ground. So let's stick with that. So that's kind of where the wooden coaster just kind of stopped at 179 feet and people didn't really want to get bigger than that. While this is going on, Kings Island would open Flight of Fear in 1996, and they were looking for kind of what the next big investment for the park was going to be. So that was also a problem, not a problem, but they were probably also trying to look into this because Six Flags had just purchased Kentucky Kingdom in 1998, so a couple years after Flight of Fear opened. So, and that's not too far from where Kings Island's at. So you have this, Paramount Park that's kind of like, we've got a big Six Flags park that's coming, just a couple hours away. And so we need a big investment to be able to compete with that. At this point, the Beast was probably Kings Island's best ride. You could also make an argument for the Bat or Vortex, which was still at the park at that point. But in 1997, park officials reached out to RCCA, who built this one right here, the Rattler, about a potential record-breaking wooden coaster. So discussions would go on for a couple years, and then finally, on May 11th, 1999, the park held a public event near a large covered crate placed along a footpath. And there was growling and snarling noises coming from inside it, and it would shake stuff. So that's kind of cool. I wish parks would do more stuff like that to announce their rides. It's kind of cool. So the park would officially announce Son of Beast. So it's kind of a play off of the Beast roller coaster that's there, right? This was the Son of Beast. So it was meant to be the sequel to the Beast, essentially. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
So it was going to be a monstrous record-breaking wooden coaster built by RCCA. And it's going to break all kinds of records. So these are the records. I got a list here. It was going to be the tallest wooden coaster, the largest drop on a wooden coaster, the fastest wooden coaster, the only wooden coaster with an inversion, and the first wooden hypercoaster at 218 feet. So this thing was massive. This thing,
it looks huge.
It is huge. So you can see here's the rendering
insane.
of the layout here. It's just this basically just this massive wooden structure, right? It was so big. So big deal for the amusement industry, right? So I think I've got a commercial here we can watch. Here's a commercial for Son of Beast.
Its father spread pandemonium throughout the Midwest. Its arrival will thrill a nation. Its legacy is destined to change the world. Presenting Son of Beast, the world's tallest, fastest, only looping wooden roller coaster. Son of Beast, only at Kings Island.
So there you go. There's a commercial.
No. Okay, but now is there a wooden coaster that has an inversion?
Well, yeah, you've been on one.
Mystic Timbers, right?
No, Mystic Timbers doesn't have inversions. There's one in our own backyard. Outlaw Run.
Oh,
yeah.
You're right.
So Outlaw Run does kind of come into play in this story. We'll talk about it in a little bit. I don't actually have it in the script, but that's a good point that wooden coaster. So, but at this point, Outlaw Run was in 2013, so we're way before Outlaw Run. Now, the way, because wooden coaster inversions had never been heard of, and the way that RCCA the solution they came up with was rather than building the whole structure out of wood, they actually built the loop out of steel, but then they put wood track on the loop. So the coaster would be on wood the entire ride, but the actual structure was wood and steel, so which qualifies as a wooden coaster.
Right.
So the coaster industry, this was like a huge deal. It was pretty much the most impressive coaster that was going to be open in 2000 until Cedar Point announced Millennium Force a couple months later. So, which that was the first steel 300-foot coaster. Mm-hmm. So lots of things happening at the turn of the century for the amusement industry. So construction would begin shortly thereafter. I've got some material stats here for you. I know you think these are fascinating. So had 2,400 concrete footers, 2.5 million feet of wood. Southern yellow pine was the wood they used. And 225,000 steel bolts.
Tree hugger in me is like, you killed a lot of them trees, man.
The amusement industry tries to make a big deal that, like, for every tree that's cut down for this stuff, they also are planting them. Mm-hmm. Like, I know Silver Dollar City makes a big deal of that.
That's true.
Problems began almost immediately. So before the coaster was even completed, it became clear to Kings Island that RCCA was cutting corners. And so they kind of had irreconcilable differences during the construction process. And Kings Island fired RCCA before the coaster was even complete. And Kings Island basically just said, we'll finish it ourselves. So that's problem one. Okay, here's some construction photos here. Here you can see here's the lift hill, building in the snow. Here's halfway through the loop they've got the construction going on here.
I hate being a construction worker for a coaster company.
Well, yeah, that would for multiple reasons, but definitely your not love of heights.
No.
So then construction's continuing throughout the end of 1999 into the beginning of 2000. On January 11th, 2000, a windstorm blew through southern Ohio and caused the second hill to completely collapse.
What?
So I guess they had just constructed it the previous day and had like some temporary supports in place. Because, like, the coaster becomes the strongest once everything is put into place, right? It's kind of like...
it's like, well, a puzzle.
Yeah, like a puzzle. Once, like, all the pieces are in place, that's when it's the strongest.
Yeah.
But it wasn't done, and so these temporary supports didn't hold it strong enough, so it just collapsed. But it was a big deal here. You can see this picture kind of shows it a little bit.
Oh my gosh.
And OSHA actually got involved to make sure that, like, the working conditions were safe for the workers, and so this is a big deal. Apparently, it wasn't bad enough that they stopped construction, though, because the park basically said, like, this won't actually cause any delays, and so anyway. So that's strike number 2. We're already off to a rough start here. So eventually the ride would be delayed by 2 weeks, but it would still open on April 28th, 2000. So here's some pictures from early on.
The ornery part of me is like, well, that's better than Zambini Singer.
Zambezi Singer.
Yeah, Zambini Singer.
Which we could talk about. Kirsty and I will trash on Zambezi Singer. Can't believe it's still not open.
Gosh.
So here's some pictures from early on. These 2 pictures are from 2000, so the year it opened. This one's a little later, but you get the idea. So So you can see here's the steel structure of the loop, but then it's got the wooden track on top of that. So so it still qualifies.
Yep.
Here's the ride experience. So after loading the train, riders left the station in a short bit of straight track before making a left-hand drop and over a small hill before turning left into the lift hill. At the crest of the lift hill, the track took a pre-drop to the left before going over the first drop, where it dropped 214 feet to the ground at 78 miles per hour. It's followed by a 70-degree bank turn to the right, and riders then descended 164 feet down a second drop into a left-hand double helix. Coming out of the helix, the train passed through a mid-course brake run. The mid-course was pretty long and it was actually designed to either slow trains down or actually it had booster tires to speed them up a little bit. Essentially, the goal was to get the train to 62.3 miles per hour, and then it would send it into the vertical loop. So it was designed to send the trains through the loop at a very specific speed, regardless of how heavy the trains were and things like that. So kind of interesting.
It is interesting.
After the mid-course, riders would drop down and to the left into the 118-foot vertical loop. Exiting the loop, the ride would conclude by entering another right-hand helix, riding a series of short hills and turns before ending at the final brake run. Opening day reviews for the ride were very good. Enthusiasts praised the ride for intense laterals and raw speed. However, there was one section of the track that a lot of riders were complaining was very painful, and I've got a little bit of footage from that first weekend here. So you can kind of watch it here as it goes up. You can see how the train just shifts like from right to left, and you can see kind of everybody just like go from right and then to left, just kind of jerk back and forth. It'll show it again here in a second. Yeah, here it goes in slow motion again. You can just kind of see the whole train just kind of
shift.
Just make like a big shift to the right and then back to the left.
That.
And so there were so many people that complained about that the park closed down the coaster to kind of look into it. And eventually they actually closed the ride down for another month while they reprofiled that section of track. Yeah, so that's not great to open a ride and close it down almost immediately.
No, but I will say that I like that they listen to the
yes,
riders.
It's better to do that than just leave it as it is. However, there was more at play than just that section of track. Unbeknownst to the guests, this was not the only reason they closed the ride. So park officials were keeping a close eye on the ride throughout the opening weekend, just seeing how things were doing. And it was swaying way more than they intended it to.
Like the whole coaster?
Mm-hmm.
No.
Now here's the thing. Coasters are supposed to sway. If you watch wooden coasters, modern wooden coasters, they still sway.
Are you trying to convince me not to like coasters?
They're supposed to do that.
They're supposed to do that.
Think about it. If it was completely stiff, whenever any pressure is put on it, it's just going to snap.
Okay, let me ask you this. Do skyscrapers sway back and forth?
They do, actually. They actually do. They're purposely designed that way.
No, this is why I don't do heights.
Buildings are purposely designed to sway just enough that if there's any pressure applied to it, it doesn't just snap and break. So no sway is bad, and too much sway is also bad. You want the sweet spot where there's just enough sway that it's, it's essentially absorbing. It's like absorption shocks, like on your car, right? It's absorbing some of that force, but, you don't want it to completely, not absorb anything, but you also don't want it to absorb nothing, right? Mm-hmm. So, Haley's never going to ride a roller coaster again after today's episode. So, particularly during the helixes is when they noticed this. There was a report that a board came loose and fell from the superstructure that day. That's not confirmed, but there's reports that happened. Oh, this is not good. During the month the ride was closed, the park also added anchored cables to the section that was swaying too much. So you can kind of see... it's not in this picture. Oh, here it is. So you can see these cables that they added to the ride right here. And then it had like an anchor in the middle. So that way it kept it from swaying too much. It was kind of, keeping it all where it was supposed to be. So
okay. Guess that's an easy fix.
Yeah, it's really not that difficult especially for wooden coasters. It's not, I've never heard of too much sway being a problem on a steel coaster before. So anyway. So, after all these modifications... Oh, I guess they added some additional wooden structure, too, to give it some more support. So, after all these modifications, the ride would reopen on May 26th, but only with one train. Apparently, they also noticed that opening weekend that the wear and tear on the track was happening so fast, like way faster than they anticipated. So they basically said, this ride isn't even going to last that long if we just, keep running it the way we're running it. So they limited the ride to one train until necessary modifications and repairs could be completed. So it wasn't that the coaster was, unsafe or anything.
Right.
But it was more that, they were worried the coaster was just going to only last, a couple years if they just threw, all the trains on it and ran it, full capacity or whatever. So... they're making modifications and repairs every day. In the meantime, they're only running one train so that it doesn't get beat up too fast. But that causes problems because now you have a brand new ride that's only running one train. Yeah. So you're having 3-hour waits. And it's a really long ride too. So, the line is moving so slow. So people could not have been happy with how operations were going. The coaster was supposed to operate 3 trains, but the park quickly learned that the way that RCCA designed the coaster made that a pretty much impossible task to run 3 trains at a time. So if you want to learn more about that, because there's way more technical stuff, go check out El Toro Ryan's video, because he goes into the details of the block zones and how the coaster was designed poorly to prevent 3-chain operations from even being possible. So. Finally, after a couple months, the park did add a second train. So, they got their repairs in a good place. They felt confident enough that they could add a second train, and things seemed like they'd calmed down and things were going well. All right? Mm-hmm. Okay. Problems didn't end there. By that summer, the ride was already developing a reputation of being extremely rough. I heard I saw some interviews about it, and some enthusiasts described it as rattling your brain out. That's how rough this thing was. So what in the world happened to this brand new coaster to cause it to, have this much, be this rough this early on? So the trains for the ride were designed by Premier Rides. Because RCCA didn't build trains. They just did the coasters, and then they outsourced the trains for their coasters to other companies. So Premier Rides designed these trains specifically for Son of Beast. And they actually had some pretty cool features, they had 12-inch wheels on them to help with speed and wheel damage. And they had articulating axles that helped for faster transitions. The problem was these features also made the trains really, really heavy. The trains were roughly 13.5 tons each, which is pretty common for steel coasters to have trains that are about that heavy, but wooden coasters have much lighter trains more often than not. It's just because the heavier a train is, the more stress is being put on the track, and steel can put up with stress like that, but wood takes more of a beating, right?
Right.
So the lighter your trains are on a wood coaster, the less repairs and the less maintenance you have to perform. So it's just nicer that way. Well, I don't know why Premier Rides and RCCA didn't even think about that. They just threw these massive heavy massive heavy trains on this wooden coaster and didn't really consider what that would do. The track was essentially just taking a beating from these heavy trains that were designed specifically for this ride. So that's a problem. And I guess the track wasn't the only thing that was taking a beating though, because they quickly discovered that RCCA kind of cut corners when it came to the structure of the ride.
Well, it said at the beginning that they cut corners. So
yeah,
and
another
indication of that.
Yeah, and maybe they noticed this early on, maybe they didn't. I don't. But essentially, what it was is on wooden coasters and steel coasters too. But you especially notice on wooden coasters is you'll have like this lattice work. I don't know the word. The structure of wooden planks. But as it gets closer to high stress parts of the track, like at the bottom of a drop or through a sharp turn, that they will actually double up or even triple up on how many planks there are just to give that part of the track extra support.
Yeah. And
RCCA didn't do anything like that. The whole structure was exactly the same. It was all identical. And so, the entire structure was uniform throughout, which didn't lead to an unsafe ride experience, but the track began to sag in the high stress parts of the track. And when I mean sag, like in your mind you think sag, you're thinking like a couple feet, but on a coaster it's really just like a couple inches. But a couple inches becomes really noticeable when you're on the ride going 70 miles an hour, right? It becomes really rough. So yeah, people just were having a miserable time on this ride. It got, ultimately, the loop became the only enjoyable part of the ride because it was steel. Mm-hmm. And so it was the only part that wasn't having structural, flaws. So it got so bad that at the end of the 2000 season, Kings Island would actually file a lawsuit against RCCA. And then RCCA fired back and said it was Kings Island that was cutting corners.
Oh yeah, because they both did it.
So now we've got this fight going on in court about no, you said, no, he said, no, she said.
That poor judge.
It was so.
Could you imagine having that judge for that?
Well,
even the jury, oh my god, I would be in an eye-rolling situation.
Well, that happens a lot in court cases, right?
But
everyone thinks that
he said, she said, yeah.
So the lawsuit would last for years.
Well, of course it does.
Meanwhile, the ride still operated because ultimately when it came down to it, the ride was not unsafe. It was just really uncomfortable. It was just a pain to ride, and people started to really dislike it because it was just rough and uncomfortable. Some people still had there were still its fans. Just depending on their preferences, I suppose. Some people like getting rattled around in a blender, but
blenders are cool.
Yeah, so that happens at the end of 2000. The ride continues to operate for the next few years as this lawsuit is going on. In 2005, RCCA would actually go bankrupt because their reputation, because of this ride, had just been completely ruined. So despite that, Kings Island would continue the lawsuit going after RCCA's insurance company. They're just trying to get their money back. Yeah, because they paid a lot of money for this, but we'll talk about it in a minute here. But so that's all going on, right? Yeah. 2006, the Paramount Parks went up for sale, which we've talked about this before. Cedar Fair buys the Paramount Parks, so now Cedar Fair owns Kings Island. That deal finalized on June 30th, 2006. Okay. 9 days later, disaster would strike, quite literally. So on the evening of July 9th, 2006, and I'm just going to read this verbatim because I don't want to miss anything here. Son of Beast would suffer a structural failure on a section of the track in the double helix following the second drop. 3 vertical supports failed and split as the train passed through. The track dipped approximately 5 inches and created a massive pothole in the track. When the next, so that train goes through, and they may have noticed something happened, but didn't really. No, everyone was fine, got off the ride. They were just like, oh, it's a rough coaster, whatever. When the next train came through, the 27 passengers on board violently hit the pothole at full force. When the train came back into the brake station, ride operators quickly noticed that guests were injured and stopped the train that was currently on the lift hill and immediately called for emergency services. Oh, to see the face that Haley's giving me. All 27 guests were transported to a nearby hospital, where all but 2 were released later that day. There were no life-threatening injuries, but moderate head and neck injuries for a few. So,
could you imagine being a passenger on this?
Yeah, I've read the story from a few of the 27 people who were on the ride that day, and it's insane. Like,
that would be so scary.
From what I understand, is there were people that were coherent enough to understand what had happened, and were literally yelling at the ride operators to shut it down, because they were trying to make sure the next train didn't go over the lift hill and have exactly what happened to them. So, unfortunately, that worked. They did. They immediately shut it down, and I think the train on the lift hill was stuck there for a while, but at least they didn't, go into the circuit of the ride. It could have been
even worse the next train.
It certainly could have. So here's some. Obviously, the ride was immediately shut down, and the state of Ohio began this big investigation into what happened. And so, so here's the news story here, and then you can see some of the pictures of the aftermath. So the state ordered SEA Limited to evaluate the ride and determine what caused the incident. So it was a 6-week investigation, and the SEA Limited found that the park had essentially made modifications to the structure to try to support it. I read the report, but I'm not technically sophisticated enough to really understand exactly what happened. I'm not an engineer, but from what I understand, they essentially tried to add more wood to strengthen the structure in certain parts of the ride. But like I said, if it doesn't have enough sway in the structure, that just causes it to snap. And that's essentially what happened, is there wasn't enough structural give. And so at some point the wood just did not have enough integrity, and it just snapped in several places. So you can see some of the splits that happened here. The investigation also discovered that similar modifications had been made in 50 other places on the ride. So it was pretty much just inevitable that this was going to happen at some point. So this is not good, right? This is a park's worst nightmare, right? Yeah. Like, the last thing you want as a big amusement park is for people to feel unsafe when they come to your park. And this was a huge deal. This is the ultimate, not the ultimate, because someone being, killed on a ride is that's the worst. And we've seen that happen before, and that's, it's terrible. This is like the next worst thing, right? Is for people to be injured on one of your rides. Yeah. So not good at all. So the ride was obviously closed for the remainder of the 2006 season and well into the 2007 season as well. So during this time, they're obviously removing this extra wood that they added because it was causing more problems than, salt. It was causing this, right? So they remove all that wood because the state basically ordered them that they could not reopen the ride unless they removed all the modifications that they made. So during this time, the decision was also made to remove the really heavy trains, because they were making these modifications because of the heavy trains. So like, okay, let's fix the problems, remove the heavy trains, and then this won't happen again, right? Mm-hmm. So they did that. So here are the old trains that we were looking at. Here are these new trains that they added. You can see the new trains had less capacity as well. Rather than 6-person cars, they moved them to 4-person cars. So they were much lighter. There was just one problem. the new lighter trains could not complete the loop. No matter how they ran the ride, they just couldn't get it fast enough to complete the loop. So in favor of keeping the ride rather than beating it up with the old trains, the famous vertical loop was removed for the 2007 season. So now you have this really big ride that was famous for being the first looping wooden coaster.
Yeah.
Now it doesn't have the loop, but it's still the tallest wooden coaster in the world. Okay? Alright, so it still holds most of its records. The best part of the ride is gone, but it still holds most of its records. Should be smoother now that you have lighter trains. So what happened next? Some enthusiasts described it as the roughest the ride had ever been. Apparently the new trains were absolute garbage. Some said it was like it was running on square wheels.
Oh, wow.
So this has gone from bad to, I won't say it's gone from bad to worse, but it's gone from horrible to still very bad. So yeah, so basically it just runs like that for several years. From 2007 to 2009, it runs with these new trains, and it's still not super popular because it's just rough as all get out.
Yeah.
June 16th, 2009. On that day, a woman claimed that she suffered a head injury while riding the coaster 2 weeks prior. Now, this claim is really strange, okay, because this isn't like previously where the injury happened and it was very clear what had happened,
right,
and everyone was injured on the ride. It's very strange for a person to come back 2 weeks later and say, hey, I got injured on your ride. So that's, I can't say that the park is completely at fault here. Like, that's a little sketchy for someone to come, and do that. And I think even in the article here, so Kings Island spokesman Don Helbig said Monday that the park closed the wooden coaster immediately after the woman's complaint. He says he doesn't know why she waited, but says Kings Island takes all guest comments seriously. So, okay, I get that. It's very strange. Why did she wait 2 weeks to report this? It seems kind of sketchy. Seems like she's just trying to get some money out of the situation, but who knows? Like he says in the article, Kings Island took it seriously, closed down the ride, and had the state come in and investigate the ride again. State actually came in, found no problems. Ride seemed totally fine. Yes, it was very rough, but it's not unsafe, right? So I guess they looked into it. She hadn't even visited first aid at the park that day. So very strange. But they, performed this maintenance review as a precaution. But even after the investigation, the ride remained closed for the remainder of the year. So not exactly sure why. But then in November of 2009, a state investigator took the stand and actually testified of mishaps and shortcuts that the park had taken during the ride's lifespan. Now, there's some, because this wasn't part of the official state investigation, there's some iffiness on whether the legitimacy of his claims. But I do have a little TV spot here. This is a couple minutes, but it's just fascinating as they're talking about the ride. And this is just really bad press for a roller coaster to, hit the news like this. So let's go ahead and watch this really quick.
Secrets concerning the Son of Beasts. I mean, you hate to think it might have happened, but did Kings Island hide the truth about the roller coaster's safety?
Well, an engineer who inspected the ride says yes, and he's now telling his story tonight. Here says John London is live with the new twist in the Son of Beasts saga. John?
Well, Cherie, heavy criticism from the state's lead investigator about what he calls piecemeal repairs to the Son of Beast, and it certainly adds to the lingering question about whether the ride will reopen next year or ever.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so be it?
I do. The state investigator who examined the Son of Beast says Kings Island put riders at risk. In a video deposition, Rick Schmizzy dissected photos of the wooden coaster and structural weak points right down to the loose bolts.
I could have spun it with my finger.
Was that loose?
It was that loose. And this is not the failure location. This is another location.
Schmizzy says when the Sun debuted 9 years ago, park owners could tell the ride was swaying too much, but instead of shutting it down and treating the whole patient, a 5-acre coaster, they took a Band-Aid approach.
It was more of let's see what we can do to kind of make it work along the way. And I thought that was a poor way to approach the problem.
With all the initial capital that went into Son of Beast and the many years' worth of repairs, it's probably a $30 million investment. It would be a huge undertaking to take it out, let alone replace it with something comparable.
But on the other hand, in going forward, if it's going to continue to be a liability for the park, they're going to have to make a difficult decision on whether to keep it or take it down.
Kings Island has made no public decision about the future of its idle investment. It was shut down in June. The state's lead investigator says Kings Island had all the necessary information to make a sound decision about fixing the Son of Beast.
And in my opinion, they didn't make the correct decision.
Now, News 5 tried several times today to reach Kings Island for comment about what the state investigator said in the video deposition, but we've received no return calls. The last public announcement from the park about the ride came in August when it said the ride would not reopen for this season. Live at Kings Island, John London, News 5.
So, there you go. So there's a little new spot on it from late in 2009. So not good. No. Not good. The coaster has been having tons of problems. It's putting the park in a bad light. You're now having accusations of taking shortcuts, whether it was the coaster manufacturer or the park. Like, the park is the one that's in the spotlight, right? So it's no good. So finally, I think the park had really just had enough. By this point, the park had spent $15 million just in repairs on top of the $15 million they spent initially for the ride. So you're looking, this is like a $30 million coaster at this point. Yes. And it's just rough. It doesn't even have a loop anymore. It was just a lost cause. And despite the fact that the investigation came back clean, the second investigation, the one for the woman that said she had an injury, the park began removing signage from the ride and the website in 2010 as the coaster just kind of sat there. And finally, in 2012, the park announced that Son of Beast was set to be demolished. And demolition would begin in September of 2012. So here's some pictures from the demolition. And then on November 20th, 2012, the last remaining structure of the lift hill was torn down. And there's actually a video of it.
I like
got it right
this.
here. Turn that down. You get the idea. So
what?
That's pretty nuts. There you go. You can kind of get an idea of where this is at. This is the bat right here before it got repainted.
Yeah.
So you can kind of get an idea of where this ride was at. So, and that's it. That's the Son of Beast.
Son of Beast no more.
During the demolition, Kings Island sold plaques with a piece of the ride's track for $100, pieces of the wood structure for $50, and bolts for $25. So there you go. So, like I said, it still had its fans, despite all the issues that it had. There were people that were still buying, things like that. So what's next? Well, in April 2013, Kings Island began construction in the area where Son of Beast once stood less than a year prior. So pretty quick after, they finished demolition in like November, December timeframe, and already by April, they're already beginning construction. Along the perimeter of the construction site, a fence was set up and had this sign. It said, so this is kind of cool. This big warning sign on it says, due to the increasing occurrence of mysterious and bone-chilling screams, it has become necessary to close this section of the park until the cause of this evil phenomenon can be identified. So, Kings Island is very good at teasing future attractions. We talked about that with Mystic Timbers. Just very good about, egging people on until they make a final announcement. So, on June 10th of that year, the park started teasing things on social media. I guess they set up scarecrows around the construction site. What else? Guests started hearing recordings of screams from behind the fence.
That's cool.
There was a graveyard that appeared outside of the construction site at one point. So just kind of little teasers that were really cool. So people were kind of speculating about different things, and some people got it right, just based on what they had heard and from rumors and stuff. But Finally, at a special event on August 8th, 2013, Kings Island would announce Banshee, the world's longest inverted coaster. The ride would also be the world's fastest full-circuit inverted coaster. So, no, not a shuttle inverted coaster. Here's the announcement video that they showed, and you will notice Son of Beast is quite prevalent in this video, which is kind of fascinating. So, for those of you listening, it's showing a graveyard with like some, gravestones that are showing past rides from Kings Island. It shows this gravestone with Son of Beast on it, and then the background is Son of Beast, and then they show it collapsing, and then it goes on to show the new coaster here. So,
I like that.
Yeah, springing up from the graveyard. Very cool. So if you want to go and watch this, you can find it on YouTube, or like I said, it'll be on Twitter, so that you can just find it in the thread that I post. So that's the scream. That scream it just played. That's the one that plays every time a train goes over the lift hill. So very interesting. Even in the announcement of this, they're showing Son of Beast. It's kind of meant to be the successor to Son of Beast in a way, because it's on the same plot of land, and the park recognized that even though Son of Beast was pretty much an absolute failure, that it still was like a big deal and like a legend in the coaster industry and among enthusiasts. So they're kind of playing off of that during this ride. So here's a render from the announcement day. So that's the whole layout that you can see there. And that's some other renders of kind of how the area around the ride would look, which this is pretty faithful to what they ended up doing. So construction was pretty quick. I forgot to mention one thing here. So the name Banshee had actually previously been trademarked by Cedar Fair to use on their 1996 stand-up coaster at Cedar Point. However, market research showed that people were too frightened by the name. So this is a Banshee Cedar Point shirt, because they actually started selling merchandise before they changed the name of the ride. So there's some very rare coaster merchandise that you can get that's Banshee, but with Cedar Point on it.
Interesting.
From 1996. They ended up naming the coaster Mantis. And then the logo was actually altered to Steel Force, which is at Dorney Park. And then the name Banshee ultimately was resurrected for the 2014 coaster at Kings Island. So kind of interesting how all this ties together, but kind of interesting. Inverted coasters had kind of died out in the mid-2000s, mostly because all the parks that wanted one already had one. Patriot at Worlds of Fun was the most recent one that had been built in 2006. So that also led to Banshee being the first B&M invert to feature the vest restraints instead of the old over-the-shoulder restraints, which we've talked about how Haley and I love them, and somehow all the other coaster enthusiasts hate them. But I think it's great. I think it makes it much more enjoyable to not have to worry about, banging your head around. So construction went pretty quick. It started later that month after the announcement, and it only took 5 months for them to finish construction on the ride. So here's some pictures from construction, again in the snow. Typical Kings Island construction.
Anything north.
Pretty much. So I think there's even some snow on the track in this picture.
Yeah,
I think
makes sense.
So, trains would be installed shortly thereafter, and testing began in March of 2014. Media preview day was April 17th, 2014. Enthusiasts and media members began gathering outside of the park as early as 4 a.m.
No.
What?
That's insane.
Like, I'm an enthusiast, don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
And I would totally show up early to be one of the first to ride a new coaster.
But
4 a.m? Get out of here.
No.
I don't care that much. That's crazy.
So early.
That is so early. Banshee would officially open to the public on April 18th, 2014, and continues to operate to this day. The ride experience is as follows. After departing from the station, the train makes a left turn towards the 167-foot chain lift hill. After reaching the top, the sound of a banshee screaming is played as the train drops into a heavily banked right turn. After reaching the bottom of the drop, riders enter a dive loop immediately followed by a vertical loop that wraps around the lift hill. Continuing down the valley, the train enters the third inversion, a zero-G roll. Next, the train makes an upward left-hand turn into a one-of-a-kind pretzel knot, an element where the train enters a dive loop followed by an Immelman loop. Upon exiting the pretzel knot, the train enters a second vertical loop before making a right turn into a slow inline twist. Following a downward left-hand helix, the train makes a final banked right turn into the final brake run. Now, due to the terrain that the coaster is built on, the difference between the highest point of the ride and the lowest point of the ride is actually 208 feet, which is kind of fascinating. So the train actually hits top speed at the bottom of the pretzel knot, which is like halfway through the ride rather than at the bottom of the first drop. So that's kind of cool.
That's cool.
Let's see. I've got some pictures here of before and after. So this is that plot of land kind of when Son of Beast was there. So you can see here, here's the bat. It wasn't known as that when it was constructed, but we'll talk about that later. And here's Adventure Express down here, Flight of Fear. Anyway, there's a Vertigo over here. So you get the idea, right?
Yeah.
So, Eiffel Tower over here. So then after construction, so here's Banshee now takes up this plot of land, which actually, it takes up the old spot where Son of Beast was. This is actually the old Son of Beast station right here, which is still there to this day, actually.
Really?
So if you're looking closely I think you can see if you go in the queue for the bat, if you look, out to your right, I think you can catch glimpses of Son of Beast's old station. I think they've used it for like haunted, like Halloween events and stuff like that.
That'd be cool. I'm not a big haunted person, but that would be kind of cool.
Yep. So and the coaster, Son of Beast, was huge because it actually came out all the way out here. This is where that helix was. So it really took up a small portion of where Son of Beast was. They've got all this room to work with back here as well. But anyway.
They add so much.
Oh, am I boring you?
No.
It's just Lee. Yeah, they really could add a lot back there. So, Banshee was a huge hit among enthusiasts and the GP alike. Kings Island reported that Banshee's opening weekend was the largest opening weekend for the park in its 43-year history.
That's good.
So, yeah, it was a big deal. Like, people, inverted coasters are kind of outdated nowadays, but for Banshee to kind of make a comeback for that model, I think it was a big deal. And obviously Kings Island didn't have one. And so for a major amusement park to get their first inverted coasters, kind of an interesting and unique situation in 2014. So the ride was so popular that it hit 1 million riders in just 83 days, that's crazy. The only ride I've heard that, and I'm sure there's others that I'm not familiar with, the only ride that I've heard of that hit it faster was Velocicoaster, was like 40-something days, which is, that's nuts. Some enthusiasts have criticized the use of the vest restraints, as we've mentioned, which is why it ranks lower than other large inverts like Alpengeist and Raptor. I personally feel the complete opposite, which we've already talked about. So,
right.
As part of Banshee's opening, this was something I was not familiar with, but around the same time, Kings Island actually rethemed the suspended coaster, so which you and I know as the Bat. When it first opened, it was actually Top Gun, because that was back when it was a Paramount park, so they were theming it to all of their, the properties that they owned. When Cedar Fair took over, they renamed it to Flight Deck. So here's Top Gun, Flight Deck. And then when Banshee opened, they decided to retheme it so that it kind of fit in more with that area of the park. And I like that they did that, And so they rethemed it to the Bat, which is actually a throwback to the first suspended coaster that the park had back in the 80s. a whole other story we'll talk about there when we talk about the bat someday. But anyway, I think that was a good decision. I wish they would do more with that. And if you've listened to our Kings Island trip report, you know that we've talked about themed areas at Kings Island, which they are doing right now, because I think Adventure Port opened today, actually. Maybe yesterday. I know it was either yesterday or today. When you're listening to this, it's been a few days now. But so they just opening this new themed area, which is great. I think if they could take everything that's over by Banshee and the Bat and retheme it to like this whole Gothic section of the park, that would be so cool. That would be so cool. And I think we talked about that in our trip report. But so I think that would be great. I think it's good they did that for the Bat. Just not sure why they didn't do it for the whole section of the park. That would have been really cool. But
it doesn't have anything on their website.
That Adventure Port opened today.
But that might be wrong. That might be...
I'm not sure. I thought I saw it on social media. But anyway, if it didn't open yet, it's going to open any day now.
Well, it says New King Island attraction now open. That was 3 days ago.
Oh, so maybe it was longer ago than I thought.
Kings Island debuts new themed area Adventure Port with 2 rides.
That was 3 days ago.
That was a day ago. So...
okay, so it's open. They have a new themed area and it's open. So... Banshee would ultimately finish second in the Golden Ticket Awards for Best New Coaster in 2014, losing out to Flying Turns at Knoebels, a ride that had been under construction for 7 years before opening in late 2013.
Oh my gosh.
That's a story for another day, but first we got to get to Knoebels and actually ride the rides before we talk about it. Banshee has remained in the top 50 steel coasters in the Golden Ticket Awards every year since it opened. It's currently sitting at number 37. Okay, that's respectable. Coaster has been a fantastic addition to Kings Island's lineup and continues to thrill millions of guests every year. So I think Banshee was a really great addition to their lineup. And the capacity is like 1,600 riders an hour, which is that is so much. That's like,
so that one review is wrong.
Yeah, the line is slow.
Yes.
Well, maybe the day they were there, they only ran one train.
They went on the 4th of July weekend. Don't go on holidays. Don't go on the weekend.
If you have a problem with waiting in lines, don't go during busy times. So, now one thing that is really cool, and I don't know if you noticed this, but I knew this was there, so I actually took a picture of it. I took this picture when we were at Kings Island.
Okay.
In line, there is this little monument that you walk right past, and it's got this little flame on it, and it has the Son of Beast logo on there, 2000 through 2009. Oh. So I don't know if you noticed that. I know we really didn't wait in line for Banshee because we didn't get to. Well, we couldn't. I couldn't because we weren't in line at the same time because we had our son with us, so we had to do parent swap. Yep. But yeah, so there's this little monument. It's actually a big monument. It's probably like 7 or 8 feet tall. Based on this picture, if I'm 5'10", it's taller than I was just based on this picture. So it's a pretty decent sized monument, but that's the little tribute to Son of Beast right in the queue for Banshee. You walk right by it. So now just to kind of wrap up the Son of Beast. So that pretty much wraps up Banshee's story. Just to wrap up Son of Beast a little bit here. There are rumors all over the place, and they might be unwarranted, who knows, but Son of Beast is such a legend in the coaster industry that people are like, first of all, a lot of people talk about, if only they could have held on a few more years, what could have RMC done to Son of Beast?
Annihilated.
It would have been so cool. They would have done something so great, but obviously that didn't happen.
Right.
But Kings Island does not have an RMC coaster yet. So people are always talking about, what if RMC does a ground-up reimagining of Son of Beast? What kind of cool stuff? That would be so cool. And if you go on YouTube and type in Son of Beast RMC, you'll see people that have gone in Planet Coaster or No Limits 2 and kind of theorized what a Son of Beast reborn by RMC could look like.
Dude. That would be sick.
So that's obviously the huge rumor, especially because, so with Orion opening in 2020, yeah, I think Orion 2020, and so, you know, we're coming up to the point where Kings Island should be announcing a new coaster in the next year or two. What could it be?
Oh,
could be.
goodness.
So now a lot of people think Vortex's plot of land is going to be what's next, which I happen to agree with.
Right.
I think they could very well put in like a family multi-launch coaster in that spot,
Okay.
which would probably be something the park could use. They don't really have a lot of family coasters. But after that,
Yep.
sky's the limit for
for real.
if they could bring in RMC for a Son of Beast
I
reimagining.
don't know why I'm yawning. I'm not even tired. I'm sorry.
So, and then last but not least, this ride is such a legend that if you go to the Kings Island store right now, you can still buy Son of Beast merchandise.
Which is kinda cool.
So you can buy a nano coaster, you can buy they got a poster, wooden cutout. This ride is such a fascinating story because despite how at times dangerous and horrible and rough and, you know, all the bad press surrounding it, people still are like, man, I wish I could have ridden Son of Beast.
Yeah.
And to be fair, as a coaster enthusiast, I kind of wish I had. I kind of wish I could say that I got to ride Son of Beast, but, you know, that was way before I got into coasters. And so, anyway, that is the history of Banshee and the infamous Son of Beast at Kings Island. So, that is quite the story, full of scandal and lies and deceit. So, but yeah, I've been excited to tell this one because this is quite a fascinating story in the amusement industry. So that begs the question: would you have ridden Son of Beast?
If I don't know. I might have had you rode it first and given me like a.
Based on what I know about this ride, I probably would have ridden it. I probably would have ridden it, and then gotten off and said, "No, you shouldn't ride that."
Yeah, so
Just
that's what we've done before. So I guess that's the most accurate.
Yes, for stuff that I know is fairly rough, I'll definitely ride it for the credit and then let you know if you should ride it or not.
Yeah.
Like that's basically how Grizzly at King's Dominion went. So, so I imagine that's probably what would have happened with Son of Beast too. So, but yeah, that is the history of Banshee and Son of Beast, and now you know probably one of the most infamous stories in the coaster enthusiast industry.
All right then.
So,
I feel full of knowledge.
Feel included in
do.
this exclusive club.
I'm moving up in the world.
All right. Well, thank you for tuning in to this episode of Airtime Traveler. If you like that episode, be sure to go and leave us a 5-star review. It's not that hard. It only takes a few seconds, and it really helps people find us in the future, so we appreciate it. Also, be sure to go and follow us on social media. We are on Instagram and Twitter. The handle is just at Airtime Traveler. And like I said, you can go and see some of the pictures and videos that I was showing Haley throughout today's episode. So,
and the reviews.
And I don't put the customer reviews on there. So no. So you can just go to Google reviews if you want to find those, because man, they're quite the tale sometimes. So
they're interesting. That's for sure. We should have a contest on who has the best review.
I don't know, man. That water bottle in the bush. That was
new.
That
was a new one.
That's got to be top 5 for sure. Wow.
Ugh. Oh, it makes me cringe.
Any final thoughts?
Don't leave your water bottle
Don't leave your water bottle in a bush by Banshee.
Or anywhere.
Or anywhere for
Please
that matter.
don't. Please don't.
Well, thank you for tuning in to this episode of the podcast, and we'll see you in the next one.